Thank you for that kind introduction. Is it mine now?
It's your floor.
Oh, okay. Is that the clicker? Good morning. First of all, I want to say how thrilled I am to be here because you're exactly the audience for my book. And so I'm very grateful to Pari for inviting me. These days I have just one thing on my mind, which I found out a couple of things after writing the book. One is fewer and fewer people read books. And and that's particularly true of the genre called business books. And so writing the book is the easy part. Getting it, getting your ideas out there is an altogether different challenge. And so sessions like this are incredibly important. We've got half an hour, I'm told. So Emma and I wanted to have a conversation and open it up to questions. So I'll try and just give you some of the key ideas in 15 minutes or less. Why did I write the book? How many of you work for multinational companies? Wow. Okay. How many of you are often frustrated? Okay. So, well, after 16 years of working at Cummins and Microsoft, I found myself frequently very puzzled about why do really smart people not understand what it takes to succeed in markets like India. And clearly it's not stupidity because they're well-managed companies, very successful, really bright people, but yet very often the decisions are a bit daft. And I asked myself, most companies in India, multinational companies in India, fundamentally still continue to get excited because of people like you, which is the talent pool in India and to do R&D and IT and all that sort of stuff. From almost 99% of companies, India is still a very tiny market. I call them the 1% club, okay, that India is just 1% of their global business and profits and revenues. And more importantly, if you project out, this is not going to change. Even 10 years from now, if you project out the growth rates, India will continue to be irrelevantly small. And this is true, as I said, not just of mediocre firms. It's true of Apple, it's true of Caterpillar, it's true of Mercedes-Benz, it's true of Toyota, any number of good companies. And people often point to the market saying, well, the Indian market is not yet developed, it's so challenging and chaotic and so forth. But interestingly, in the same difficult market, in industry after industry, you find one or two companies that have truly broken through. And for them, India is a very substantial part of the business. And so why is this contrast? How can a company like McDonald's, one of my favorite examples you'll see in the book, which is the world's largest reseller of beef, come to a country which is still heavily vegetarian and the cow is sacred and make a success of it? And if they can do that, why can't your companies be more successful in the market? Okay, so today what am I going to talk about? There's lots of interesting stuff in the book, so I urge you to go read it. But, I talk at a very practical level. See, I'm not an academic, I'm not a consultant. I've basically done work like you. And so this is a view from the trenches about what it takes to practically succeed. So for instance, how do you deal with corruption? Why are so few companies successful at innovating for the local market, right? Should you do a joint venture or not, and how do you make these work? So very, very practical things. Well, what sort of a country manager should you have? Does nationality matter? Does it have to be Indian or not? But I'm not going to go into all these arcane details. Today I want to talk about just three things. First of all, does India really matter? Second, what does it really take? And third, why is it so uncommon? Now, as we all know, the shine has come off India's story. In fact, it couldn't possibly be worse. I hesitate to say that because just as I say it, it might get worse. But, as I started out my research in the CEO interviews 2 years ago, almost every CEO said, yeah, Ravi, that time the working title of my book was Winning in India. They said, that's fine, but why even bother? Does India still matter? Okay? And this is a typical sentiment, and it's because of all these factors, whether it's corruption, tax harassment, bureaucracy, etc. And so therefore, very quickly, I had to come to my own conclusions about why does India really matter. And there are 3 or 4 charts which I will throw up. First of all, this is India's GDP growth rate in absolute numbers, absolute GDP over 50, 60 years. And what you'll notice is, despite in this period, we've had some really bad governments and some spectacularly bad ideas. But still, somehow India continues to progress. Now, you can argue that the curve should have been steeper, we could have got here a lot sooner, but the reality is, in our own clumsy way, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, we found ourselves here. And therefore, and India is very much a story of bottom-up growth. Growth happens despite the government rather than because of it. So we're rather unlike our large neighbor, and therefore, the chances are, although it feels pretty rough right now, you know, if you look backwards 10 years from now, 20 years from now, this curve will continue to be an upward-looking one. Second one, this looks at, you know, under a very modest growth scenario. This is not 8 and 9% GDP growth. If India grows just 6% or 6.5%, what happens to consumption? And you'll see that yellow bar is India's consumption, the red bar is China's middle-class consumption. And under any scenario, just because of demographics and aspirations, our consumption will be pretty healthy, okay? And so anybody who's serving consumers or the businesses that serve, you know, consumer goods companies should do well. Here's a really interesting graph. This has nothing to do with R&D, but I think this perspective is important as you do your work, right? If you look at the last 3 decades, what you'll notice in every decade, there are 3 or 4 years where the economy grows well, and it's sandwiched between 6 or 7 years when it doesn't grow well. Okay? What does this mean? If you're a company, if you want to do well in India, you have to just hang in there during the tough times, and then when the growth comes, you run like crazy. And if you do that over 1 or 2 cycles, you're pretty okay. The companies that don't do well are the ones that give up during times like this. They say, why bother? Let me go to Nigeria, let me go to Indonesia, we'll come back. And so the strategy for success is pretty straightforward. So that's one set of reasons that says, you know, things are not pretty, but they'll continue to be better tomorrow than they are today economically. I can't talk about other things. The second thing is people talk a lot about corruption. I was just on my US book tour, and almost every conversation with media or companies was dominated by corruption. Okay, we clearly have a terrible reputation. But here's a very interesting map. It shows the corruption heat index, and India's, lo and behold, glowing orange. But what else you'll notice is all emerging markets are either orange or red. They're just like us, okay? So yeah, there are a few exceptions, which is the developed world, the US, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, but that's it. All emerging markets are fundamentally corrupt, with very minor exceptions. The second one is, this is World Bank's heat index of how hard it is to do business. And India is pretty damn hard, as you know. Just getting to the hotel was a major problem. But, but guess what, again? Most of the emerging markets are tough places. And don't be fooled by Afghanistan and Pakistan looking green. They just didn't have data, okay? So, so that's a bit sort of misleading. And so the conclusion I drew is very simple, that you know, chaos is not a defining feature of just India. Chaos is, in fact, a defining feature of every emerging market. And global companies, you know, if they want to participate in these economies, don't really have much of a choice. You can't wish away chaos. You can't say, I'll come back to India when India is less chaotic, less corrupt. You have to learn to deal with these things and succeed in such environments. And the third and final reason is the reason for the subtitle of the book. What I found is, in the companies that have done really well in India, they're really beginning to use India as a base to succeed in many more markets, not just emerging markets, but all markets. In the bottom right-hand corner is a small green generator set. Okay? This happened during my tenure at Cummins. We started buying engines, packaging them into small gen sets, and built a very nice business in India. And then the company took notice, and we started exporting these gensets to many parts of the world. So today in the US, if you buy a home genset, it'll be made in Pune. Same thing is true of the guy on the left bottom corner. You know, for years, John Deere used to, you know, ignore Mahindra, and then Mahindra took out these ads, full-page ads in the US saying, hey, we're number one. In unit volumes, Mahindra crossed John Deere to become the #1 tractor manufacturer in the world. And so Deere woke up and they realized if they don't get competitive in the small tractor segment, this is going to be a real problem. And for years, they never could figure that out. Finally, they put a team together in Pune. They come up with a competitive small tractor. It does well in India. It's being exported to 60, 70 countries. You see the same thing with the Pureit water purifier from Unilever out there, and so on. So in your own companies, you'll have examples where if you can crack the domestic market, you find that the value proposition will play well, not just in other emerging markets, even in the developed world. So you look at those shampoo sachets, Unilever developed them for emerging markets, but now, because of the income compression in Western Europe, in Spain, in Greece, and Portugal, people are lapping up these single-use sachets as well. So it's products, it's business models, and it's talent. If you want to crack Africa, where would you go and hire people from? You'd hire it not from Switzerland and Germany, right? You'd hire them from places like India, where people are not, don't go into paralysis when they see chaos, but actually embrace it. When it comes to succeeding in emerging markets, India and places like India tend to be a pretty good incubator for the kind of leadership talent that you need. That's why there's a whole chapter on this, and so I created the subtitle, Win in India, Win Everywhere. So these are the reasons why India still matters, not just because it is a decent-sized market growing reasonably, but fundamentally because most of the rest of the world looks like us. And if you don't succeed here, you're going to encounter the same problems in all these places. And in many ways, India is a lab where you cook up your emerging market model. Okay, so that's kind of one basic idea. Second basic idea. Why is it that some companies have really succeeded? First of all, what is success? When I started asking CEOs, why aren't you successful in India? They got all bristly. What do you mean we're not successful? So they said, we are successful. Well, how do you define success? Well, we met budget. Okay? And in 2008, meeting budget was not easy. Most countries didn't meet their budgets. Or they'll say, we grew double digits in India. Now, many of you know you can be growing double digits in India and still be irrelevant. So I define success as these three things. You're a market leader in the country and you're growing faster than anybody else. Number two, India is contributing substantially to the new growth of the company. The company is adding $1 billion of new revenue globally. How much is India contributing? And if it's not 10, 15%, you're not there yet. And finally, how are you using what you've created in India, whether it's smart people, new products, new business models, capabilities, to succeed elsewhere? When you do this, a set of companies becomes, is really quite impressive in their performance. And these are some of them. There probably are quite a few more. And, but out of 4,000 companies, about 1% would fit the bill. Now, this is an interesting set because they're not just consumer products companies, they're industrials, they're banks, they're some technology companies, etc. So it's across industries. And number two, they're from all parts of the world. They're from Germany, Sweden, France, UK, US, Korean, etc. So something that is happening that is more fundamental. It's not based on, success is not just based on industry or country of origin. And so, to cut a long story short, there are 3 or 4 things that really make a difference. The most important thing is the mindset, okay, that top thing. What defines whether a company is successful or not in these markets, whether it's India or anywhere else, is how does the CEO and the leadership team and the board define what success means? Okay? Those that have high ambitions tend to do better than those that are just here. Okay? We must be in India. We must be in 100 more countries. Those don't tend to do well. The CEOs that say, listen, here's a country of 1.2 billion people. It's not looking pretty right now. But if we are a global company, we must be a leader in a country of 1.2 billion people. And therefore, I don't care what it takes. We're going to go and succeed. That's the sort of mindset you need. What that means is you've got to be patient. So if your mindset says, hey, listen, I need to make my money in every quarter and every year, it's not going to work. You take a company like McDonald's or a company like Cummins, they take 8, 9 years to figure out how to make money. But after that, it's just this hockey stick, okay? So take the long-term view, sacrifice short-term profits for long-term leadership, etc. The second idea is really important, which is you can't just import your global product and stay at the top of the pyramid like Apple, okay? You can't expect and wait for the market to evolve and look like what you want. You have to go and figure out what the market needs, and like Pitney Bowes or whatever, figure out what you can build and build a business around. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Apple, right? They have less than 1% market share. Are there any Apple people here? No. One. Okay. I'm probably the least favorite person of Apple, because I've written quite extensively in the last 6 weeks about how they're missing the emerging market opportunity. And Tim Cook in October is interviewed and says, hey, listen, don't you guys care about emerging markets? He said, I love India. But guess what? The distribution system is so inefficient. Modern retail is not developed. So we are going to prioritize other places. And then they said, what about products for emerging markets? He says, listen, people are the same, whether they're poor people or middle-income people, they all want the same beautiful product, so we're not going to sacrifice and shave corners off it. While Apple takes this view, guess what Samsung is doing, right? So they run away with the market, and now Apple is forced to play catch up. So this is not a good strategy, okay? Let me give you a different strategy. When I joined Microsoft in 2004, one of the huge challenges we had was piracy. So, Emma, I'm going way over. Take your time. But nobody's moving, so I think I'm okay. But so one of the biggest problems we had was piracy. Now, Bill Gates always had this charitable view of piracy. He said, listen, usage matters more than whether people pay us right now or not. Get them using Windows and Office. One day we'll collect, okay? Now, Steve Ballmer was much more impatient. He said, hey, that's fine. It's a new regime in town. Collect now. So, I was the new head. I went and met the government, said, listen, you've got to enforce things more, all that stuff. Then one minister sat me down and said, listen, I think you're a nice chap, but you don't understand how India works. In India, copyright means the right to copy. So he said, you'll be long gone before you change the habits of Indians. And so you might want to take a look at your own business model, and you'll be more successful. So that's what we did. So we began to take a look at pricing, distribution, product, etc. And so when people ask me today, what's the price of Office in India? Well, I don't know. But the answer depends on who you are. Are you a big company? Are you in a small business? Are you government? Are you a school? Are you a consumer? Are you a student or an NGO? Depending on who you are, you will pay a different price for roughly the same bits, okay? That's called differential pricing, okay? Now, the pharma companies haven't done that. They're still saying, hey, government, you need to protect our intellectual property, patents, etc., and you saw the Novartis decision. So this idea is super important. The real action is not at the top, but the mass market. And when you get to the mass market, you have to change as a company. Over time, the country may change, but if you wait for the country to change to your business model, you're going to be dead, irrelevant. So that's kind of two. Third, you need to localize management, leadership, empower the local team, get as many decisions happening here rather than in Singapore or in the US or wherever. You have to learn to deal with corruption, chaos, blah, blah, blah. So it takes a very, very different set of capabilities to really succeed. This is in stark contrast to 99 out of 100 companies. What do? They show up, you obviously start at the top of the pyramid, you bring your global products, your management methods, pricing, everything, and replicate it. And for the first few years, life is good because you're selling to rich people, okay? And you're off a base of zero, so you celebrate double-digit growth for the first 5-7 years. And then what happens is growth slows. You've saturated the top of the pyramid, there's more competition, And if you're not willing to come down, growth basically slows. That's why you see that yellow line beginning. So if the industry grows 8%, you grow 8%. That's it. And this is where most companies get dejected with India. And that's where all companies are today. They say, India is too hard. You know, we bought that India story. Clearly, it's not happening. So what do they say? We'll be back. Let's go to Indonesia. Let's go to Africa. Let's go somewhere else. Let's even go to Myanmar. We'll be back when India gets its act together. Well, India may never get its act together, but there's still a big market. And problem is, one of your competitors runs away with the business. And then you wake up and it's going to be pretty tough going. Look at the car business. 4 people own 90% market share of the automobile business in India. And it's not the big guys, right? So Toyota, Volkswagen, Renault, Nissan, who are the top players, they're all desperately trying to claw back 1% share at a time. And this is what happens in industry after industry. So they get stuck in the midway trap. So read about that. It's there in chapter 2. And the good news is, even if you're stuck in the midway trap, it's possible to get out of it. The classic example for me was GE. GE is this amazingly well-run company. Jack Welch put India on the map. They came early to India. Yet throughout the last decade, they did not grow and had 2 years of what they call degrowth, which I think is shorthand for they shrank. But finally, Jeff Immelt comes here in 2010, says there's no way to go down further, so what do we have to lose? Let's blow up the model. Let's get a senior guy who we trust as the country head. Let's change the operating model. Everybody reports to a single leader. India's its own P&L, blah, 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 blah. And then they get back to 50% CAGR over the next 2 years. So it is possible to get out of it, and that's what I talk a lot about in the book. Okay, last thing. This all sounds pretty straightforward. It's in fact very obvious to you, because you live in this place. Why is it not obvious to the people we work for, the people in Silicon Valley or Seattle or Chicago or Munich or wherever? Because fundamentally we're asking them to perform what I call an unnatural act. It's an indelicate word, but that's what you're asking them to do. You're basically saying, hey, listen, not all countries are equal, okay? You can't treat them all equally based on just their revenues. Some countries are fundamentally more important, and you need to take a big bet on these and take a longer-term view. And despite the chaos, or maybe because of the chaos, India is one of them. Number 2, you can't wait for the market to look like what you want. You better go change for the market. You can't just dump your global products here and sell them. You've got to figure out how to develop products for this market, and that can't be done far away. You have to do it right here using really bright people like you. You've got to sacrifice short-term profits for long-term leadership, and so on and so forth. Wow, that is unnatural. And moreover, you're asking them to do an unnatural act at a time when India is looking spectacularly bad. Okay? I came back more than 16 years ago. I can't remember it looking this bad on every dimension. And the image of India outside is even worse. So how many CEOs do you think are going to say, let me ignore what all the media says and what all you guys, my leadership team is saying, I'm going to bet on India? Not many. So that's the fundamental problem we have, right? You're asking the CEO to say, hey, make a bet on India and, over other opportunities you have. Number 2, in India, to make money, it could take 10 years. Well, if the CEO tenure is down to 6 years on average, which is what it is for a US CEO, you're saying, hey, you do all the hard work, you take the risk, you might get fired for taking this risk, but if you're successful, your successor is going to look like a hero. Not many people are willing to do that, okay? And most of all, 98, according to an IBM study, 98 out of 100 global CEOs have no knowledge or experience working in emerging markets. What do? They come on the corporate jet for one day. Many of them don't even trust the food. They bring their own food on the company plane. You have these highly staged visits, right? You come to places like this, you cut ribbons, you talk to your employees, speak to the media, and then you're gone to the next country. So they are, if you're a CEO who doesn't really get out there, roll up the sleeves, immerse yourself in the market, you're not going to look past the chaos. And which is why in most companies, they're taking a cautious view, and these kinds of companies are being eclipsed by new companies. So you take a company like CAT. In India and China, they're a disaster. Okay? I don't know how many CAT people there are, but I feel for this company. Great company. And Volvo, JCB, Cummins are doing much better. Samsung doing much better than Apple. Okay? Unilever eclipsing P&G in India and many other emerging markets. So what you're seeing right now is the world order beginning to shift based on who is getting emerging market story right. I'll stop here and invite my friend MR back. Sorry for running over. We have about 5 minutes.
That was a terrific preamble to our questions, but I read chapter 6, and that's the chapter I want to talk to you about, right? How do you innovate in India? And you had given examples of McDonald's, but I want to focus. This audience is primarily technology folks, right? So can you walk us through when you came to Microsoft and you had to collect money and you did all this differential pricing, can you walk us a little bit through how you made it the second largest geography for Microsoft? I mean, how did that happen, and what's the story there?
Well, actually, I wrote the book because we didn't succeed. In fact, in the front row is one of my right-hand guys, Ram Narayan. Ram's at eBay now, but he was with Microsoft and with me for a long time during our experiment stage. So when I came, we saw that we had to sell Windows, Office, and server licenses to established customers like everywhere else, the top of the pyramid. But the big challenge was, and the big opportunity was the middle of the pyramid. And the middle is difficult because they don't understand the value of PCs. PC penetration is low, broadband is non-existent, there's not a lot you can do with it. And anyway, people are bypassing PCs as a category, going straight to smartphones. Okay, even back in 2005, it was pretty evident that India would leapfrog and go directly to the wireless internet. So what we did, fortunately, that time Bill Gates was still there, and the CTO of the company, Craig Mundy, who you may know, was assigned to work with India and China. And we started cooking up a lot of good experiments, which we were able to execute right here, given the Hyderabad Development Center. I don't know, again, if there are Microsoft folks here, but anyway, we had a pretty good gig going between Microsoft Research, which we set up in Bangalore, the Dev Center in Hyderabad, and then a team to do this kind of incubation work. You should read chapter 6. I don't want to give it away. But we conducted lots of experiments. Okay? How do you make PCs relevant to school kids? Okay? How can you come up with alternative pricing models so people don't have to pay upfront for hardware and software? How far can you push the envelope with a smartphone? The problem happened, in the meanwhile, of course, the left hand was still selling traditional products to traditional customers and growing very rapidly, okay? What happened is there was regime change, and the new regime was more impatient for results on a global basis, not just in India. And so many of these things take time. You know, it may take 5-7 years to figure out how to make these experiments work and put a business model around it. And we simply pull the plug, I think in some cases, too early. So net result is Microsoft is $1 billion by simply replicating its traditional model, which is global model. And all these wonderful experiments are actually now been scaled up and being converted into successful business by other people. And I feel quite disappointed at myself and at the company for not having done a better job at that. And that's what I chronicle in chapter 6.
So what is the advice you have specifically for these tech guys in this audience? I know you've given examples of McDonald's and Unilever and other companies. Can we focus for a minute on tech?
You know, you can get only so far by doing skunk works. Fundamentally, you can do a proof of concept of something and show an interesting little prototype or a toy, okay? Ultimately, it has to be the company's strategy to develop products in India for India or products in India for certain regions or whatever. If it is not officially blessed, it's, at some point you just get exhausted swimming up current. And what happens is at some point you have to make it mainstream. And at that point, you know, it has to get on somebody's price list. Somebody, a sales organization has to have a quota. So even if you're successful, the rug gets pulled out. So number one thing is you've got to get this on strategy by working with the CEO and the leadership team and showing them the opportunity that is there. That's one. Number two, it's pretty hard to do it out of an R&D organization. Okay? You really need to put a whole team together that owns end-to-end responsibility with the P&L, the go-to-market, all those things. Otherwise, what happens is bright R&D guys come up with some clever idea. The sales guy says, this is too sort of wacko or whatever. I've got real things to do, and nothing ever happens. So you need to put, I've seen too many skunk works happening in R&D centers. They're interesting. They serve a useful purpose. They show what is possible, what could be. But you're never going to get commercially successful and move the needle unless the company is willing to create a business team around it. Okay, so that's number two. Number three is what I call the no exit policy. Okay, you have, this is something I learned from Mukesh Ambani, who knows a lot about never giving up. Okay, or Ratan Tata. So, you know, all these things that succeed take a long, long time to actually get there, right? I serve on the board of Infosys, and I spend a lot of time with the founders. And it wasn't evident even till 94, 95 that this was a company that's going to be moderately successful. Okay, so, and that was year 20 or something. So you ask Bill or Steve at Microsoft, why were you successful? Well, the other guys gave up too early. Okay, so you need patience. You can't unplug the life support system from these kind of experiments. They take time. These are some of the things, but I don't want to give out the whole book.